The morning atmosphere inside the studio had a strange, electric charge, not the kind that excites the producers, but the kind that makes seasoned crew members exchange uneasy glances. Everyone sensed it. The View's staff had seen tense interviews before, but today felt different, heavier, almost faded. Joy Behar walked onto the set with a stiffness in her shoulders that betrayed the irritation she'd been carrying since sunrise. She tossed her handbag down beside her chair, muttering something under her breath that only the makeup artist beside her caught. The artist offered a sympathetic smile and whispered, "It'll be fine." Joy didn't reply. Mark Wahlberg's arrival minutes earlier had set the tone. He'd walked in relaxed and grounded, greeting crew members by name, shaking hands with a few audience members, and radiating an easy confidence Joy was not in the mood for. Even before he'd taken his seat, the fans had cheered loudly, and Joy had muttered, "Oh, here we go," just loud enough for Whoopi to hear. Whoopi gave her a long look, the kind that said, "Don't start something you can't finish." But Joy was already tightly wound. The audience applause swelled as Whoopi introduced Mark, the camera sweeping across eager faces before landing on the panel. Mark waved to the crowd, flashing his trademark grin, then settled into his seat with calm composure. Sarah leaned forward, excited. Sunny smiled professionally. Joy kept her expression still, lips pressed thin. Whoopi began the segment with a warm introduction, praising Mark's newest film, a heartfelt, gritty story about redemption, and acknowledging the philanthropic projects he'd championed recently. The audience nodded along, supportive and captivated. Mark responded with humility, speaking about the communities he worked with, the kids he mentored, the foundation's goals for the next year. It was the sort of uplifting conversation the producers loved. Then Joy, like a match tossed into dry brush, leaned in. "Let's talk about something real, Mark," she said abruptly, cutting off Sarah's interjection. "Let's talk about those comments you made years ago. You know the ones. People haven't forgotten." The temperature dropped instantly. Even Mark felt it. He turned his head slowly toward her, meeting her gaze with a calm, measured look that made the room tighten. Sunny glanced sideways at Whoopi. Sarah sat back in her chair with a small inhale. In the control room, a producer mouthed, "Oh, no." Mark took a moment before responding. "Joy, I've addressed my past many, many times. Publicly, privately. I came here today to talk about the work my team and I have been doing." Yeah, Joy cut in with a dismissive flick of her hand. "Nice PR move, but accountability matters. Or do you think people just forget because you smile and talk about charity?" The front row gasped. Someone whispered, "Damn." Mark didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward aggressively. Instead, he sat straighter, the way someone does when they decide they're not going to let themselves be pushed around. "Joy," he said, tone still calm, "I've been accountable. For decades. Everything about my past is something I have owned, apologized for, worked beyond, and tried to turn into meaningful action. I'm not here to rehash headlines from 20 years ago." Joy tilted her chin. "Well, maybe you should be." That was the moment everything shifted. The audience felt it, the panel felt it, even the cameras seemed to sharpen their focus. Mark rested his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, and spoke with quiet force. "If we're talking accountability, shouldn't we also talk about the number of people you've insulted or disrespected on this show for years?" Joy blinked hard, her hand tightened around the pen sheet. "Been tapping." Mark continued, eyes steady. "Should we bring up the clips? There's a lot of them. You take shots at people every week. That's your thing, right? Stir the pot, push buttons, but don't pretend you're the guardian of moral integrity here. That's not fair." The audience reacted like they'd been hit by a wave, gasps, murmurs, heads turning to see Joy's reaction. Joy sat frozen. She had expected deflection or discomfort. She had not expected a counterpunch delivered with surgical precision. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "So now you're attacking me?" Mark shook his head. "No, I'm responding. There's a difference. You came at me, not with something relevant, not with something meaningful, but with something you thought would embarrass me. I'm not embarrassed. I've done the work. I've shown the work. But if you're going to call me out, Joy, be ready when I call you out too." Sunny let out a soft exhale. Sarah pressed her lips together, uncomfortable. Whoopi stared at the desk like she was praying silently. The tension was suffocating. Joy, cheeks already flushed, tried to regain control. "I'm asking what the people want to know." Mark's eyebrows lifted slightly. "No, you're asking what you want to stir up. The people know who I've been for the last 20 years. They know the work I've done since the mistakes I made as a teenager. But you, the commercial break did little to cool the atmosphere. The studio hummed with a tension so thick it felt physical. Crew members whispered frantically into headsets. Producers huddled near the monitors trying to decide whether to soften the segment, cut it short, or steer it into safer territory. But the moment the red light blinked back on and the theme music faded, it became clear that this train had no intention of stopping gently. Mark Wahlberg sat in the same steady, grounded posture he'd held before the break, but there was a new steeliness in his eyes. He hadn't stormed off. He hadn't backed down. That alone unnerved the room. Seasoned hosts were used to guests folding under pressure. Mark wasn't folding, not today. Joy Behar, however, returned from the break visibly rattled. She took her seat faster than usual, her jaw tight, her hands smoothing the stack of cards she no longer knew how to use. Whoopi attempted to reintroduce the next segment with a nervous chuckle, but her voice betrayed the strain. "We're back with Mark Wahlberg," she began, trying to inject ease that simply wasn't there. "We were having a spirited discussion, and we're going to keep things productive." Sarah offered a soft smile toward the camera as though trying to reassure viewers at home that everything was fine. Sunny nodded politely, but the studio audience sensed the undercurrent and leaned forward collectively, waiting for whatever eruption might follow. Mark decided not to wait for Joy to make her next move. He'd given her a chance to pivot during the break, but she returned with the same tight-lipped defensiveness. So he spoke first. "You know," he said calmly, his voice steady but carrying unmistakable force, "I didn't come here to argue. I came here to talk about a film that deals with second chances, forgiveness, and the hard work it takes to change your life. That's the entire theme, and instead, I got ambushed with something I've already spent years working through." Joy snapped her attention toward him. "Ambushed? It's a talk show. I asked a question. You didn't ask," Mark said without raising his voice. "You accused." The audience reacted softly but audibly, a shifting wave of murmurs and sympathetic sighs. Joy shot back, "Oh please, don't play the victim. You're a big star. You can handle some tough questions." Mark took a breath, visibly holding onto his composure. "Yes, I can handle tough questions. But what you did wasn't that. It wasn't journalism. It wasn't curiosity. It was provocation. And you weren't doing it for truth. You were doing it for a moment. I just refused to play into it." Joy scoffed. "You're being dramatic. That was the match." Mark leaned in just slightly, but enough to remind everyone of the untapped power behind his collected demeanor. "Joy," he said, "you tried to drag me backward, into a version of myself I haven't been for decades. And when I wouldn't let you, you doubled down." Sunny watched with wide eyes, her expression a careful mix of fascination and concern. Sarah had gone perfectly still. Whoopi closed her eyes briefly like she was bracing for impact. Mark continued, "Here's the truth. What I did as a teenager is something I will always take responsibility for. I've apologized. I've made amends. I've spent every year since lifting people up instead of hurting them. That's my life's work, so if you want to talk about that work, I'm here. But if you want to take cheap shots..." Joy interrupted sharply. "Cheap shots? You really think I'm the bad guy here?" Mark didn't hesitate. In this moment, yes. Time froze. Joy's mouth opened slightly, stunned, not by the words, but by the quiet certainty behind them. No stammering, no defensiveness, just truth delivered with a calm she couldn't match. Whoopi intervened again. All right, let's everybody take a breath," she said, but even she sounded defeated by the inevitability of the moment. Joy, trying desperately to reclaim her footing, shot back at Mark with newfound intensity. "You think you're perfect. You think you're some saint now. You've made mistakes. We all have. And talking about them isn't attacking you." Mark responded with that same unshakable clarity. "You're right. Talking about them isn't an attack. Weaponizing them is." The audience gasped again. Joy's cheeks flushed a deep, angry red. She straightened her posture to its rigid maximum. "I'm done with this," she snapped suddenly, her voice sharp as a blade. She threw her cue cards down onto the table with a slap that echoed across the set. Sarah's eyes widened. Sunny took a subtle step back in her chair. Whoopi raised her hands in alarm. Joy pushed her chair back so abruptly that it nearly toppled over. She stood, shaking her head as she faced the camera. "If I can't ask real questions on this show anymore, then why am I even here?" The audience erupted, not with applause, not with boos, but with chaotic noise, gasps, shouts, whispers, confusion. A producer in the wings frantically motioned for the camera crew, mouthing, "Stay wide. Stay wide." Joy continued, not caring that millions were watching. "I'm sick of being treated like the villain because men don't like being confronted.